Greetings. My name is Todd Hodgkinson, and I'm an associate professor at Drake University in Des Moines, Iowa. Welcome to my presentation for the Dabrowski Conference entitled Falling Apart Together, Supporting Positive Disintegration Through Concept-Based Literature Instruction. So, as many of you know, gifted learners are unique in that they experience the world differently, right, than their peers. They exhibit a heightened sense of intellectual and imaginational and emotional intensity. They demonstrate higher levels of metacognitive awareness, greater capacity for empathy, and oftentimes express moral concerns for others in society kind of earlier than their grade level peers or non-gifted peers. Of course, all of that is somewhat of a double-edged sword. Despite all of those positive aspects of being gifted, giftedness, as we know, or as most of us know who are watching this presentation, it comes with its own challenges. In many respects, in addition to, even though gifted children and adolescents have a unique worldview and sense of humor, they sometimes, because of this, have difficulty making friends, especially with school-age peers. Also, the intellectual, emotional, imaginational, physical intensities that often come with being gifted can sometimes be overwhelming. I know gifted kids who get easily distracted because the tag in their shirt is bothering them to such a degree that they can't focus, for example. So, along with greater metacognitive awareness, you also have, I guess, the challenge of coming to realizations about the world sooner than your school-age peers. For example, recognizing absurdities and contradictions in life. Adults saying one thing, but then doing another, right? Contradictions between laws and then political agendas like gun rights, right, and gun control, versus and the need for to keep people safe, but yet the desire to support Second Amendment rights, et cetera. So, early development of moral concerns and greater capacity for empathy can cause stress and anxiety in gifted children and adolescents' life. I just think of students I've had in the past as a gifted and talented coordinator who will tell me they were watching the news last night, or their parent will tell me they're watching the news last night, and they saw a hurricane happen in a country across the world, and just were so wrecked or devastated emotionally for the rest of the evening because they saw what trauma and what grief and what damage that hurricane caused. So although we want, right, and it's a great thing to have moral concern and capacity for empathy for others, it can turn out to be a challenge, right? Not to mention all the multi-potentiality issues that gifted children have and worrying about the future and who they're going to be and what they're going to be, right? So many challenges with being gifted is the point. Of course, this is well documented, right? Any of the texts that are on this slide here will definitely support this idea that being gifted is challenging. JT Webb in particular has noted that gifted individuals are more likely to become consumed with existential concerns, right? And because of that, are more susceptible to experiencing periods of existential angst or anxiety or crisis that can lead to, of course, long-term depression, or OCD, or even thoughts of suicide, right? If you're familiar with the work of Tracy Cross, you understand that sometimes that can this existential awareness can lead to those suicidal thoughts. So how can we help, right? Which is really the basis of this presentation. Especially in terms of supporting those social-emotional realities that gifted learners, gifted individuals face. I'm proposing that one way that teachers can help is by giving students the opportunity, gifted learners, to nurture authentic identity development, and largely through concept-based literature instruction, Now, before I go on, let me take a moment just to explain what I mean by teachers can help support social emotional realities of gifted learners by nurturing authentic identity development. Now, if you're an attendee of this conference, I'm assuming you're familiar with Casimir Dabrowski's work, and especially his theory of personal development called positive disintegration. If you're not, back in, I think, 1960s, I want to say mid to late 60s, Dabrowski theorized that individuals who were born gifted, basically, needed to go through the series of existential trials in order to really help realize themselves, right? To realize that reach their potential as individuals, but also to free themselves from kind of society, social indoctrination, I believe is the term he used as well. Essentially he believed that gifted individuals need to fall apart or disintegrate, right? Identity-wise, before they could reintegrate into a more fully enlightened, aware whole. You can see here the different levels, right? The 5 different levels in Dabrowski's theory of personality development. Excuse me. One point before I kind of just give a brief overview of these 5 different levels. The transition between the different levels is often marked, as I alluded to, by adversity. It's catalyzed by adversity, a life challenge, something basically that forces an individual, a gifted individual, to re-examine their every belief, right? And each level that occurs, not to a greater extent, but that occurs, forcing them to, in short, reevaluate things, right? Dabrowski, again, I don't really want to go into too much detail because I'm assuming that many of you are familiar with the theory itself. But starting with primary integration, right? This first level where many of us are at, gifted individuals especially, or including, this is where most of our belief system is marked by selfishness, egocentrism, right? All about me thinking, if you will. And again, individuals won't, according to Dabrowski, won't move past this level into the next one, level disintegration, until something happens, something jars them out of this primary integration. Oftentimes that's a crisis in one's life, the death of a loved one or loss of an important relationship that kind of causes the individual to re-examine, question who they are, their life, their purpose, right? This continues if the individual opens themselves up to basically a greater awareness of the world. Or an individual may revert back to, and it was important to note that Dabrowski stated that an individual could fall back into primary integration if they fail to continue with this awareness, right? This greater awareness. But if the individual does, again, I think the expression of once the bell has been rung, it can't be unrung. So if that's the case, and an individual continues to, continue to question their reality, they move up through the different stages, right? Again, experiencing disintegration, reintegration, until the final level where, in theory, the individual achieves this self-actualization, if you will, to the point where they are living their life in a very deliberate way, where they're weighing decisions about their life based on, these principled beliefs. In short, they've become this kind of authentic, congruent, whole person by disintegrating and then reintegrating and questioning themselves and the world. And so in general, right, that's Dabrowski's theory. So how can we help students do this? In particular, how could we use concept-based literature instruction, right, to accomplish this? Now, again, before I delve into the specifics of what I just posed, the question I just posed. Let me just give a quick or a brief overview of concept-based instruction in case you're not familiar with it. I know it's an approach that is used in across the country in many schools, but not every school. So in short, when I refer to concept-based instruction, I mean this approach to teaching that is oriented, around two things. The exploration of big ideas and thought-provoking questions, and then kind of the transfer of those understandings to new and novel settings. Okay. And the whole purpose of concept-based instruction is to move beyond a basic level of knowledge to the deeper understanding level. This approach to instruction is often conceptualized as three-dimensional curriculum, where in a lot of schools, learning is oriented around topics, if you will, and then under those topics, students learn facts, right, and then skills, right, associated with that. Concept-based instruction attempts to push students beyond that surface level type of thinking. Another analogy, if you will, or another way that concept-based instruction is conceptualized is as an iceberg, right? Pushing beyond the surface of that iceberg, pushing student thinking to that conceptual level, the level of generalization, right, or conceptual understanding, which results in deeper, longer lasting learning. Right? There's a wonderful book by Frank Smith, I believe, called Learning to Forget, I think, if I'm recalling the title. Basically, his argument is that a lot of school is designed around this two-dimensional model, right? He doesn't explicitly refer to this, but that we often ask kids to learn to forget, to memorize facts, right? And that doesn't really help them in school or in life, right? It's not deep learning. Concept-based instruction, however, works to kind of, basically to remedy that, so that students have a deeper understanding of them on both the content, but also the world itself. And so let me give you a specific example of concept-based instruction. Again, the purpose of being to go beyond this topical level, if you will, where this red line in the middle of the slide is at. So let's imagine you're a teacher studying, I don't know, current events, and the topic of US-bound migrant caravan comes up. Maybe a student brings in a newspaper article, or it's on a Channel 1 news segment, or whatever the case may be. You might teach students about this topic and then move on, right, to another topic. So they might learn that the migrants in this caravan are from South America, are seeking better living conditions, are walking literally to the U.S. and in search of asylum, seeking asylum, and that may be it. You may discuss the article and then, as I said, move on to the next topic, right? Well, in concept-based instruction, if you take a concept-based instruction approach to this topic, US-bound migrant caravan, you push student thinking to that conceptual level. So you ask students actually to think about, okay, what does it mean to migrate? Or why do people migrate? Oftentimes for opportunity, right? Or what is this concept of asylum? And in exploring those concepts, migration and asylum and opportunity, and exploring the relationships between them, the whole end goal is to help students come to conceptual understandings, either that you have formulated as a teacher, or better yet, that students realize on their own, right? That come to on their own. So for example, if in the discussions about what migration is and why people migrate and the concept of asylum, students might just kind of organically come to the realization that people often migrate to seek opportunities, right? This could come up in the conversation, opportunities that they don't have when they currently exist. Now that's a big idea. That's a conceptual understanding that will serve students well if they remember that. Beyond just the study of the US-bound migrant caravan, right? This idea that people migrate to seek opportunities. And I say it's a big idea is because it can be applied to other contexts. And that is another key component of concept-based instruction, this idea of learning transfer. And so, once you have conversations with students about migration, about the concepts of asylum and opportunity, and they come to maybe this understanding that people migrate in search of opportunity, you can ask them to apply that understanding to different contexts, maybe to the US-Mexican immigration, right? That leads to calls of building walls, et cetera. Or, even going back in time and history, the westward expansion of pioneers, right? This type of transfer is often referred to in concept-based instruction as horizontal transfer, because it's to similar types of events or situations, even though it's not maybe in the current time. But you can also ask students to apply, their understanding about people searching in search of opportunity and migration to other dissimilar types of situations. And so exploring why Jewish people migrated, right, during World War II, out of Germany to escape persecution, right? Or, abduction of the African people into slavery in the United States, right? And by starting with these initial understandings of migration, you're pushing students to deeper and deeper understandings about this concept. And hopefully they'll understand that people don't just migrate for opportunities, but also they are sometimes forced to migrate because they are abducted or because they are fleeing persecution. And again, you could explore multiple similar examples for that horizontal transfer, just based on that new conceptual understanding. So, just to review, what is concept-based instruction? It's really pushing students beyond that topical level of thinking. It's giving students the opportunity to explore concepts with, and well, how do you do that? Well, you ask questions, right? You give them writing prompts, you have whole class and small group discussions, maybe projects. Basically, you do what good teachers do, right? But the whole point is to help them to come to these realizations, these conceptual understandings. Now, I know that was quick, and if you're not familiar with this approach, you might be a little bit in the dark. I will say this, although the presentation is not intended to provide a more detailed overview of concept-based instruction, if this sounds like a approach that you're interested in or want to learn more about, if you're unfamiliar with it, I would recommend these resources, in particular the Stern, Ferraro, Moncurn text, the tools for teaching conceptual understanding. I've used that in the past when I've introduced this approach to teaching to my teacher, pre-service teachers or in-service teachers when I'm teaching about CBI. So just some resources for you. So, okay, so getting back to my initial point, how can teachers support the social emotional realities of gifted learners by nurturing nurturing authentic identity development, through B, concept-based literature instruction. So let's take a closer look. As I mentioned earlier, gifted individuals are unique. They often predisposed to considering big questions about the world, like who am I, why am I here? Is there an afterlife? Why do people act this way and then or say this thing and then act this way? Can you ever really truly know anybody, right? So these big kind of existential concerns, right, tend to consume gifted individuals. In particular, gifted children and gifted adolescents come to this, often ask these questions earlier in life than their non-gifted peers. So what I'm proposing is that we as teachers use literary text to explore existential topics and concerns with students to help them better understand their realities, and then in turn, push them through positive disintegration, right? Help shape their identity so they can become fully whole. Now, you may be wondering where I came up with these 4 concerns, death, life, meaning, isolation, freedom. I didn't come up with these concerns. They're actually from the work of Irvin Yalom, his 1980 text, Existential Psychotherapy, which basically, in which he basically claims that human beings are consumed by these four ideas, these four concepts, and that by exploring them, we can come to a deeper understanding about the world and ourselves. So imagine you're a literature teacher, or just a teacher in general, and you're doing a literature study, and you throw out the question, what's the purpose in life? Maybe you have them write about this, your students write about this. Maybe you conduct a pair share or a whole class discussion afterwards, right? And you get some good feedback. You get you hear some different ideas. Great, right? Record those ideas. Imagine then you paired that discussion or that activity with a reading of Mary Oliver's The Summer Day. For those of you who are not familiar with this poem, Mary Oliver contemplates ideas such as creation, religion, this idea of a higher being or of a God, life and death, fate and free will, identity, life meaning. There are a lot of themes that you could explore in this short poem. If you never read the poem, I'll just pause here and give you a moment to do so. It's a beautiful piece of work. Yeah, I'll just leave it at that. So let me give you a moment here. All right, hopefully that was enough. And hopefully you can see how this poem might help to push students in different directions, push students deeper in terms of this initial conversation about what the purpose they see as the purpose of their life to be, right? You could go in a number of directions, but you could simply ask, after reading this poem, what can we learn about the purpose of life from Mary Oliver's work? And perhaps students will come up with, allude to the idea of death, right? Or creation, or this idea of learning from nature, right? And maybe they come to this understanding that you explore that, you look at lines, well, how is that so? Can you point to a line that might support that idea? And through that conversation, you generate the conceptual understanding. Well, we as humans often find purpose and meaning in life in contemplating nature, in taking time to go camping, to just slow down, to go and take a walk in the woods, to pick up grasshoppers and just wonder about them, right? Again, you could keep pushing student understanding in terms of these concepts of life meaning, or the relationship between life and death, or creation, by asking questions like, well, okay, so tell me what else, what do you think the speaker means by this line? Pointing to the line where she says, tell me, what else should I have done? Doesn't everything die at last and too soon? Tell me what it is you plan to do with your one wild and precious life. And by discussing, by posing that question and discussing it, students may come to the understanding that death really helps us to kind of put life in perspective, or life is precious because we know we're going to die someday, all of us, which is a big reality and jarring enough for some students that might push them in terms of that positive disintegration. Of course, continue the conversation with maybe an activity, an arts-based activity, where you have students create a heart map, right? If you've never done a heart map, check out Georgia Hurd's text from late 90s, Awakening the Heart, where students basically come up with their own illustration of a heart, and then basically identify what matters to them, what they care about. And you could start that activity off with, alluding to Mary Oliver's poem, what do you care about in this precious world? Draw it in that heart. Or Webb came up with a similar type of activity, a personal coat of arms activity, where students are asked to explore what gives them purpose, right? What gives their life meaning, and divide up that personal coat of arms into different sections based on really what they care about, right? Their favorite things or people or events in life, right? I mean, you could follow that up with a photojournalist activity where you ask students to take pictures of things that matter to them, right? And then record their ideas, their thoughts, their feelings, their emotions as they're doing that activity, and then share those with each other, right? There are a number of directions that you could go with this. And if you wanted to continue exploring this concept of life meaning, you could pose questions about values, right? And have them do an activity, a values-based activity, where they identify their values, their beliefs, their principles, and then reflect on the extent to which they're living, right, within those values. You could explore questions like, to what extent is my life purpose tied to helping others? And then weave in text, right? Carl and the Meaning of Life, a great children's book about an earthworm that has this existential crisis, and is digging through the dirt one day, and then stops and wonders, why the heck am I digging through the dirt? And then goes and asks different animals why they do what they do, and comes to the realization that in a lot of respects, we do what we do for others, right? Because we're part of kind of an interconnected whole, and we keep the ball rolling, if you will, but also because it makes them happy. And so, this discussion of different texts, Whirligig by Paul Fleischman is a beautiful novel, YA novel, where the main character goes through existential crisis after killing someone accidentally with his motor vehicle. That has themes that resonate with this whole topic, this concept of life meaning. Or you could bring in other of the major existential concerns, right? Isolation, freedom, death, or identity in and of itself. What does it mean to belong? Why do I feel the need to try on different personalities? And I don't think there's any young adult who wouldn't be interested in having those conversations. Or life and freedom, right? Pairing up those ideas and exploring the concepts of fate and free will, or freedom and death, the idea of what happens to me after I die. Is there an afterlife, right? So there are different directions, obviously, you can go, and you go those directions by introducing students to different texts and exploring those ideas with different activities, right, is what I'm proposing. So, of course, depending on the student population that you're working with, you may even want to start with this idea of existentialism in and of itself. And in fact, this might be a better entry point for older adolescents, as it might help to contextualize kind of the purpose of why you're going into the later discussions of life and death, etc. But explore what is existentialism, and what are the major concerns of existentialists? Who are some of the major existentialists, right? What kind of defines that existential life view? But and hopefully some of these conceptual understandings will result. So, for example, existentialists believe that we're each responsible for creating purpose and meaning in life. And so hopefully through answering those questions, having those discussions, reading text related to those ideas, right? So, anything from Camus to Kafka to Sartre, right? Students will recognize these kind of key underpinnings of existential society. Again, you may not want to go that direction, especially if you're working maybe with younger kids, or limited time, right? So I will say this, in my experience, in exploring existential concerns with students, you want to be aware that some students either might not feel comfortable, with this type of thinking. It's scary, and it does cause, especially for gifted individuals, it raises more questions than it provides answers, which is often scary, right? In turn, parents might not feel comfortable with you asking these types of questions. And, in a sense, what you're getting into is kind of the realm of bibliotherapy. When you're pairing literature discussion with artistic, reflection or expression. And so you might need to have conversations with students, with parents, with guardians about, why you're doing this, right? And it may involve the idea of helping students to realize them true selves, right? To become true individuals. I've also had conversations about the purposes of school, and public school being, especially serving as an enlarging experience for students. Right? The whole point is for them to move beyond kind of their world of family, their home culture, the insular worlds, right, that we cocoon ourselves in as we're younger, which is really the only way to grow personally, right? To move beyond that. That's a tough conversation to have with some parents, and some teachers, especially too. So I get it. I probably wouldn't tackle this if I didn't feel comfortable having those conversations. So speaking of which, I'd also encourage you to educate yourself on how to have these types of deeper conversations with students, because you really are, in a sense, practicing this idea of bibliotherapy. There are a wide range of resources out there. Again, you can see them on the screen. All of these have been helpful to me in my own experience, to, again, push student thinking, to help students move beyond that primary level of primary integration, and kind of develop into more principled individuals, right? Don't discount school counselors or others, psychologists, right? Especially if you notice students struggling, right, as a result of the conversations you're having, or you read something that a student has written that is concerning to you. These are heady topics, and exploring the idea of afterlife or what happens when I die, and maybe the student realizes or comes to a realization for themselves, maybe there is no afterlife. That's a jarring idea, right? So how do you help the student work through those ideas? Well, one is the continued conversation through literature, right? And hearing other people and other their fellow students' ideas. But there might be a point where you need to have one-on-one conversations with students, or more appropriately bring in a counselor, right? Teachers, although we're often asked to act as counselors, we're not. And so don't be afraid to rely on your resources. Speaking of which, there's a handout to go along with this presentation. I've just mentioned a few of the titles. There are a myriad of them, and it really depends on which theme, which existential concern you really want to mine with students. I've also included some links to some activities that I found helpful, value sorts, and development of personal mission statements. Of course, you can go back through the PowerPoint and check out the other resources that I've alluded to, like the heart maps or the personal coat of arms as well. So I hope you found this presentation insightful. If you have any comments or questions, feel free to reach out to me. I'm happy to respond. I do want to thank you for taking the time to view the presentation, and definitely viewed the Dabrowski conference for giving me the space to share these ideas. So thank you very much.